Start with the before lecture chant, everyone. And unsurpassed, penetrating, and perfect Dharma is rarely met with, even in 100,000 million kalpas. Having it to see and listen to remember and accept, I vow to taste the truth of the Tathagata's words. Thank you, everyone, and good morning. As some of you know, 2 weeks ago I gave a talk on letting go, and I had used the examples of a recent visit that I had had with a friend who began this laborious task of cleaning out things, so using it kind of as a metaphor. And most of us could relate to that. We had a good discussion about that afterwards. This need to sort through, in this case, in the case of my friend, these tangible things that we've accumulated, and make choices about what stays in our lives and what goes. And we can no doubt feel that our experiences of how reluctant we can be, of course, to detach. And to live, once we decided to detach from something, to live with that detachment, to live with that decision, and it can be difficult. But as some of you shared, it also can be incredibly freeing as well. So the afternoon of that talk, I was reading an article, and one of the subtitles was, "Everything in its place." And I thought, oh, maybe that's the kernel for my next talk. And I had a vision of my friend's tidy spaces now, her closet and her garage, and it really felt like that. Very grounding, very secure. But I think we know, and I think we can feel the very shakiness that sort of accompanies this kind of thinking. Everything in its place. But I also shared a female ancestor story with you, that of Chiono's no moon, no water. And here also, we were identifying with Chiono's very strong desire, her need really, to attain the way of Buddha. And we could appreciate, I think, the older nun who told her that all she need do is turn towards the source of her delusive thoughts. And this turning, of course, is turning towards, of course, the nun called Zazen. And so practice was Chiono's companion, day and night. And she wholeheartedly committed to that path. And she too, she felt on very firm ground. She felt she had it together. Everything in its place. But as you remember, one night when she fetched water in this old bucket, the bottom fell out. And she, at that moment, was enlightened to the reality of her need to just hold this bucket together in what she says with this and that until it fell apart, and including all of her delusions. So these two stories both point to our tendency to hold on, whether it be things, thoughts, feelings, perceptions, and to use them to prop us up, to prop up our ego, this ego with a big E, this self with a big S, capital S, to bolster and protect the sense of self, who we are, what we think we need, how we walk this very life. But our practice really teaches us that this self cannot really be trusted. It is not fixed. It's not some sort of fixed identity, but rather one that is constantly changing. It's being created, and sometimes not for good. And our practice, the Buddhist teachings, of course, address this. We're guided along to be able to more clearly see and hear and feel our own delusions, which cloud our very original nature, which is one of openness and clarity and compassion. And we're always faced with letting go, moment by moment, because everything is of the nature of change. And holding on really is tiresome and probably rather fruitless, to be honest, in the end. But for us to even begin and continue to walk this Buddhist path, we had this willingness that I spoke of last week, to be curious, to be vulnerable, although maybe that's not something we felt at first in our practice, to loosen our grip in what we perceived as ourselves and our lives. And we had a willingness to turn towards that which we were experiencing. For me, when I first began Buddhist meditation in the Theravadan tradition, I had little guidance. I just read a lot. I sat every day, and I felt I really didn't know what the heck I was doing, to be honest. At times I was just bored or distracted or in pain. Maybe that's familiar. But after getting up off the cushion, I still had the willingness and the curiosity, a big dose of curiosity, to return back to the cushion. And I had the sincere intention to not stop, to not turn away. The intention to just stay. I must say that I also had a few voices that kind of spurred me on. When I first started to sit in the 1990s. At that time, Pema Chodron, the beloved Tibetan nun and teacher that we know, had written her book, No Time to Waste, which is at my bedside. And actually, I just left it there all the time, whether I was reading it or not. And when I didn't sit one evening, I would actually just hear those words in my mind and feel a bit of dread, just thinking about what I might have wasted. And so it is too letting go, which has its own core of willingness to do just that, to let go, and our intention to turn towards whatever we are facing. There's a well-known parable in Buddhism of two monks and a woman. And there are plenty of versions of this. But basically, this is what the story is. A senior monk and a junior monk were traveling together out on a road outside the city. And at one point they came to a river with a really strong current. And as the monks were kind of thinking about preparing to cross the river, they saw a woman who also was attempting to cross the river. And she asked if they could please help her to cross to the other side. And the two monks glanced at one another, because really they had taken vows not to touch a woman or be in close proximity to a woman. But then, without a word, the older monk picked up the woman, carried her across the river, placed her gently on the other side, and then carried on with his own journey. Now, the younger monk couldn't believe what had just happened. And after rejoining his companion finally, he was just speechless. And an hour passed without a word between them, and then 2 hours, and finally 3 hours. And then at one point, the younger monk just couldn't contain himself any longer, and he said, "As monks were not permitted to touch a woman, how could you then carry that woman on your shoulders?" The older monk looked at him and replied, "Brother, I set her down on the other side of the river long ago. Why are you still carrying her?" And this simple Zen story has some beautiful messages within it about living in the present moment and letting go. Something I found really interesting and important in this story the first time I heard it was the very fact that the elder monk did what he did. There's a long history in Buddhism of forbidding monks to touch or be in close proximity to women. And it's easy, of course, to see why such rules were created, I suppose. This rule is actually part of the Vinaya, the code of conduct for Theravadan monks today across Southeast Asia. So if you're in Thailand, for example, you will notice that women will move away from monks to the side as they approach them on a sidewalk, so as not to be close to them. At the beginning of my many visits to Thailand over several decades, I remember a few times my Thai friends would sort of grab me by the arm and jerk me further away from a passing monk. And it didn't take long, though, for me to learn to respect this religious and cultural and social norm. But anyway, this elder monk, who was very aware of this rule and had likely respected it during his entire lifetime as a monk, did something quite unexpected. In my opinion, this is a really wonderful example of just him reacting spontaneously in the present moment, guided by his deepest sense of connectedness and compassion. In spite of this rule, the elder monk did what was needed in order to serve in that very moment. His action can be said to be one of skillful means, really. An action based on the situation and what's needed, the needs and the understanding of the people involved, and an understanding of one's own capability and experience. And it's also a moment of letting go of and letting go into, as I talked about a bit last week or 2 weeks ago. That is, by letting go of his strict adherence to this rule for just a moment, he was able to let go into a selfless act that benefited another human being. He was able to serve. So this story also illustrates, of course, our tendency to just hold on and grasp and cling to things. And maybe for us, it's that pair of, so I'm thinking about my friend in her closet, maybe it's that pair of hiking pants in our closet that we could fit into 25 years ago. When we could live the joy of strenuous and fulfilling mountain hikes. Maybe it's that. Or maybe we felt something similar to the junior monk. It can be a egregious act that we can't let go of, for instance. It can be a word or a sentence yelled at us by a loved one in a moment of anger or frustration, or a decade ago, or just yesterday. We have a tendency to hold on to material things and to carry around past hurts and resentments long past their expected shelf life, really. I think it's true that we can all think of a number of examples when we've ruminated for quite some time maybe on what someone said to us or how they acted toward us. I can. And we can eventually let go of these too, because of our willingness to turn towards our own feelings and thoughts and to stay with them, just simply stay with them. We may discover that we don't like what we see too much sometimes, because it might likely become quite clear that these struggles are really about us. They're actually in our minds, in our hearts. We carry them in our bodies. But when we can see and feel the pain this is causing us, there's an opening that allows us to bring a lot of compassion to ourselves, realizing that holding on to these hurtful moments is really only hurting us. So staying with our feelings and our thoughts, on and off the cushion, we can feel the grip loosening, and eventually these sticky things will no longer have power over us. They will no longer serve us, really, in any way, and we will see this. And it is then that we have the opportunity to feel the freedom of letting go that Thich Nhat Hanh often spoke of, saying that this freedom is the only condition for happiness. In his words, if we still cling to anything, anger, anxiety, possessions, we cannot be free. We have a lot to let go of. Personally, I found in the last years of my practice that some of the hardest things to let go of are the thoughts and the perceptions and the constructs that actually aren't empowering me. Those things from which I derive a sense of power, often very usable power. One example that came to mind when I was writing this was this feeling that we've talked about of having things together. And for most of my adult life, I really believed that, at least on some level. And everyone else did too. I had this air of calm and control, I guess. And I was actually the person people wanted in the room in a crisis, I'm told. And these are qualities that I actually can feel in me. They do exist. But this persona was also empowering me. I came to realize that. It protected me. And it also put distance between me and others. Friends and family recently had told, well, somewhat recently, had told me that sometimes in the past that they just really didn't want to talk to me about some of the challenges and the messes in their lives, because I always seem to have things sewn together. They're embarrassed to talk to me about it. You know, it breaks my heart today to think of this. But as a result, I missed out, obviously, on so much of what was going on in their personal lives, and they missed out on mine. You know, I like this quote by James Hillman, which was actually given to me by Mary Ellen some years ago. And he says, anytime you're gonna grow, you're gonna lose something. You're losing what you're hanging on to keep safe. You're losing habits that you're comfortable with. You're losing familiarity. End quote. But what's the freedom in that, you might ask? The freedom comes from being unbound by the constraints of what we hold on to so dearly. It develops, in my opinion, from this wave of uncertainty that we really become more and more adept at riding on. This freedom, to me, is a grounding in the very groundlessness of an ever-changing present moment. And we can do this when we willingly and intentionally commit to just letting go.